The Donovan Mitchell trade from this past offseason is one of the more interesting trades we've seen in the last decade in the league for a variety of different reasons, but I think it's possible that it is going to start an entire new era in the NBA. Really quickly though, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, PrizePicks. If you've been wanting to give PrizePicks a try, you can click the link down in the description and use code SPORTING. Again, that is code SPORTING, the link also in the description for a 100% deposit match up to $100. Again, if you're going to deposit at PrizePicks, use the link in the description or use code SPORTING. Now, if you've never done PrizePicks before, you don't know what it is, I'm going to tell you. So basically, you go on their site, you go on the app on your phone, and you try and figure out what you think is going to happen in each of these NBA games. So if you're like me, you try and figure out trends. You understand now a couple of games into the year, okay, this team is better at defending the three. This guy typically goes off against this team, whatever it be, rebounds, points, assists, combined rebounds, points, assists, 3-pointers made, steals, blocks, turnovers. There's a ton of stuff on PrizePicks, free throws made, all that stuff. And you start to look at these trends, you try and figure out, okay, I think this guy's going to have, more than 1.5 threes in a game. This guy's going to have less than 11 rebounds in a game, whatever the case may be. And you go on to PrizePicks, they have all these different selections and you pick more or less for each of them. You pick between 2 and 5 on a given night. You can do basketball, baseball, football, anything, all that stuff combined. You can mix and match. And if you get them correct, you win some cash. And like I said, this is just really fun because if you're someone like me, you watch a lot of basketball, you feel like you understand, what each team does well or each player does well. And you feel like you really can figure out what could happen in a particular game. PrizePicks is a great opportunity to take advantage of that. Again, that link is in the description. You can use code SPORTING. You click that link, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100 on PrizePicks. And thank you again to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. So on the surface, you might not think that the Donovan Mitchell trade really means much for the league as a whole, right? I mean, Cleveland is like pretty good, but not necessarily a contender. Donovan Mitchell is pretty good, but not necessarily an MVP caliber guy. We see star trades like this all the time. We see teams like Cleveland trading away future picks all the time. It's not that big of a deal, right? But the thing that I think is interesting about this is the fact that Donovan Mitchell ended up in Cleveland, because pretty much the entirety of the time when we hear about star trade rumors, right? When they have assets, it's Lakers, Clippers, Nets, Knicks, Miami, a couple of other teams, Dallas sometimes sprinkled in there. But most of the time it's the same teams, right? And it's all these bigger market teams. And even with the Mitchell stuff, it was all about, okay, how can the Knicks get Donovan Mitchell? What's the Knicks offer going to be? At certain points I was making videos, I was basically like, it's going to be the Knicks at some point, like it's just going to happen. And then out of nowhere, he ends up in Cleveland. And this is interesting for a couple of different reasons. One, the bigger market, smaller market thing is a huge deal in the NBA. It's a big talking point right now. They're even talking about, these bigger market teams, Lakers, Clippers, Warriors, being able to, spend all this money and being able to go way into the luxury tax. And that's an advantage over these smaller market teams that are not able to do that necessarily. Even in a salary capped league, there is still the advantage of being a bigger market team financially, as well as being able to attract big name players and stars and free agents, whether it be trades or otherwise. With as prevalent as trades are in the league, being one of those bigger market teams and a desirable franchise is absolutely an advantage. And it's a big conversation point, right? But when you think about it, when you think about the history of the last 10 to 15 years in the league, with the exception of, for example, the decision with LeBron in 2010, where he, goes with all these other stars, they go to Miami. In general, unless you're counting just like pure star power, these smaller market teams generally represent a better opportunity to win at the highest level in the league than these bigger market teams do, for a couple of different reasons, specifically in this like newer era, this more modern era of the NBA, right? So if you're the Clippers or you're the Lakers or the Nets or the Knicks or the Heat, like there's this pressure on you constantly to win basketball games, like to put a good product on the floor. Like you can't be bad for 3 years intentionally. If you're the Knicks, you can accidentally, but intentionally it's hard to build a franchise the way that all these other teams are, right? Like Memphis, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, whatever. Those teams can be bad for a couple years and it's not that big a deal. It's a massive deal for these other teams. And so they're constantly tripping over themselves and trying to push themselves towards 40, 45 win mediocre teams. And that leaves them without assets. It leaves them without young players. And yes, they might have a star or two in the Lakers case. And obviously they end up winning the title with LeBron in 2020. But a lot of times they end up making mistake after mistake. Think about when LeBron went to the Lakers in 2018. He didn't go there because of this great roster construction they put together, or because of all these smart moves, or because of, all this possibility. It's because he wanted to be a Laker. It's because they had a couple of assets, because they had the second pick in the draft for like 3 out of the prior 4 years, and because he wanted to be in LA and be the Laker. That's the only reason he went there. And ultimately they end up trading for Anthony Davis and they win the title and it works out. But it didn't have anything to do with like, oh, I have a lot of confidence in this front office to build this team correctly, or like right now as the team is currently constructed, I can see how all these pieces fit together. It wasn't like that. And yes, they did have assets, but it was because they were so bad for the prior few years. And even those assets they screwed up. The D'Lo selection was a disaster for them. They had big contracts like Timofey Mozgov and Luol Deng on the roster. Like they weren't constructed properly. And realistically, if LeBron had looked around the league and understood like, hey, I could go to a different place, I could go to this team or that team, there were better opportunities from a basketball perspective that provided him a better opportunity to win that he could have gone to. Now that's free agency. Trade is obviously different because you're giving up assets in return. But when you look at the Donovan Mitchell situation, him going to New York and him going to Cleveland, specifically, strictly from a basketball perspective in terms of his opportunity to win games, it's not close over the next 4 or 5 years in Cleveland as opposed to New York. The way the rosters are currently constructed, I understand you can make the case about the Knicks being a free agency destination, and once you have Donovan Mitchell there, they become even more of a destination. Maybe you could bring in stars that way. I understand that case, but if you looked at their rosters at the time that Mitchell was up for trade, what they would have given up in the trade, what Cleveland ultimately did, and how their rosters would have looked like afterwards, it's not even close. Cleveland is by far the better defensive team. They're a team that is better equipped to play in a variety of different ways. They have another secondary playmaker there with Darius Garland alongside Donovan Mitchell, and they're good. Like, Cleveland is legit good, and it's a great opportunity for a star like Mitchell because Cleveland needed offensive firepower. They needed a guy that could score on the perimeter and create for other guys, and that's exactly what he does. And it's just interesting because I think we all assumed that, well, it was going to be a bigger market team eventually, and the fact that he had a choice, like, he can tell teams, I do or don't want to go here, and I'm sure he's happy to be in Cleveland, but I'm not sure that he would have ended up a Cavalier if he had, 1 year left on his deal. He had multiple years left on his deal, and so ultimately he ends up in Cleveland. And I'm really hoping this becomes a thing. I made this point at the time that the trade went down. Going to these smaller market teams that are better set up for long-term success is a better option from a basketball perspective. And for years and years and years and years and years, for the entire history of the league, bigger market teams have been the place that stars have gone because of the financial opportunities they provide, because you're front and center in the league, because they get more national TV games, because you are just a bigger figure when you're on those bigger teams. And yes, that is still the case, but that gap is shrinking dramatically in terms of national TV opportunities, in terms of financial opportunities. That gap is shrinking where the world is more connected than it's ever been. You don't need to be in LA to be a star. You don't need to be in New York or Miami to be a star. And going to these places like Cleveland that give you a better basketball opportunity to win without leaving behind as much in terms of these bigger market advantages, I'm hoping is going to end up being the right move. Because when you think about, there's 3 teams for me specifically over the next couple of seasons that are like perfect, like tailor-made for a star to show up and play. Those teams are Memphis, New Orleans, and Oklahoma City. Memphis and New Orleans are good right now. Memphis probably at the top, then New Orleans. Oklahoma City is going to get there. I think they're like a pretty decent team, even without Chet playing right now, and even with them not being super motivated to win. Talent-wise, I think they're good. They've got assets, they've got depth, they've got wings that can guard and shoot. They've got, in each case, they've already got like a star-type player, Ja Zion, obviously Brandon Ingram as well. Shea is incredible. Shea's really, really good. They've got young players. They have assets you can trade. Those are the best basketball situations. And if you compare those 3 teams, if you just take the name away, take the city away, you compare those 3 teams to going and playing for the Knicks or the Nets or Miami or the Lakers or the Clippers over the next couple of years, it's not close. Those teams are aging. Those teams don't have future assets with the exception of the Knicks. Really, the Knicks are the best option out of those 3, but I would still say that, or out of those 4, but I would still say that those other teams, have a better opportunity to win. And so if you just remove the names and you remove the teams, you remove the location, basketball-wise, it's so much better to go to these smaller market teams. I think Mitchell's going to prove that. Like, I think Cleveland's going to be legit good, and they're going to be good the entirety of the time that Mitchell's there, assuming that he re-signs in a couple of years, because they can guard, they have wings, they have depth. It's almost like, I know that it's been a disaster since it happened, but like, think about how Brooklyn and the Clippers differentiated themselves as free agency destinations at the time that Kyrie, KD, Kawhi, and Paul George went to those teams. They built up teams you could see yourself playing with as a star. They had wings, they had guys that could guard, they had, in the Nets case, they had Jared Allen, who ends up becoming an all-star as a rim protector. And a lot of those pieces ended up being moved for a variety of different reasons. But like, putting together a team that's actually good basketball-wise and a smaller market team, I'm thinking is going to be more of an advantage than it has been in the past than just being a bigger market free agent or star trade team. And I think that we're seeing that as well from these teams, because when you look at Oklahoma City, when you look at Memphis, when you look at New Orleans, like, they have these future picks and they have these assets, and it's like, what are you going to use those on if not to get a star? Like, you can move up in the draft to a certain extent, but like, even if Oklahoma City offered a team 20 first-round picks to get the first pick in the draft to get Victor Wembanyama, I don't know if that team is going to give that up. Like, moving up in the NBA draft into the top 3 is a really difficult thing to do. And so if it's not for that, it has to be for one of these stars. So I think these other teams are starting to recognize and realize this as well, that like, we are a bigger deal now and we have a better opportunity now, even prior to the Mitchell trade, but now even more so, to bring in these stars and to be almost on a level playing field in terms of free agency or trade destination, because our teams are built better. Like, yes, they're in New York and that's exciting. And obviously, if you're an American player and you are growing up and you're thinking about being really successful as an NBA player, you're thinking about doing it in LA or New York or Miami. But like, basketball wise, you have a better opportunity to win typically at these smaller market teams, because there is some advantage there of being able to be bad, of being able to tank, of not having the constant pressure of tripping over yourselves, of like, we need to win 45 games because we need to be like a marquee attraction in our city and we've been bad and this is embarrassing. Like, they don't have to deal with that kind of stuff as much, and it allows for better roster construction and ultimately a better basketball situation for every one of these stars. And the other piece of this that I still don't think gets talked about enough is we have all these big time like international stars in the league now, right? So like Giannis, Jokic, and I don't think those guys really care as much about, playing in New York, play in LA. Like, I'm sure it'd be cool. Like, I remember Porzingis when he went to the Knicks, like, was really excited about, being with the Knicks, and you can go back and look at these guys when they were younger and they're like fans of these bigger market teams typically, but like, these guys are just generally, they're fine. Like, they're happy in Denver, they're happy in Milwaukee, and we're going to continue to have more and more of these international stars, whether it be Wembanyama or otherwise. And if those guys ever do, request to be traded or whatever the case may be, like, I don't think they're going to care as much about playing for the Knicks or playing for the Lakers. Like, good basketball situation is what they're looking at. And again, it's not close. Not only is it not close individually, case by case, but also you just have more options. Like, there's more opportunity out there to go to whatever team and really pick an opportunity that's going to put you in the best position to win. So, like, for example, Bradley Beal. If you want to tell me that Bradley Beal, to the Lakers makes a lot of sense, Russ and the 2 picks, whatever, that's fine. But like, basketball wise, protecting Bradley Beal defensively, allowing him to be what he is, which is a good perimeter scorer, but not like a best guy on a championship team type scorer. Try and convince me that he's not better off in Memphis or in New Orleans or Oklahoma City than he would be with the Knicks or the Clippers or the Lakers or the Nets. Like, he would just be better off in those situations. And honestly, you could argue for Memphis specifically, like, I don't think I would trade Desmond Bane for Bradley Beal right now, if I'm being completely honest. But regardless, it's just a better situation, and you can't argue that. And there's something to be said almost for these smaller market advantages occurring in terms of the roster construction ability you have, in terms of flexibility, in terms of the ability really to tank. And I know that there's always going to be that thing for these teams and these players where it's like, they'd rather be in Boston, right? Like, they'd rather be playing for the Celtics, I should say. They'd rather be in New York. They'd rather be in LA. But at a certain point, you got to just look at it and say, basketball wise, like, where am I going to be successful? Do I care as much about playing in New York, or do I care about winning multiple titles? And that, to me, is something I think if it changes significantly over the next 10 years, it's going to be linked directly to the Donovan Mitchell trade from this past offseason to Cleveland.